What is faith? The great American humorist Mark Twain once joked, "Faith is believing what you know ain't so." We may smile at this quip because something in us recognizes that, in fact, faith often goes beyond the rational intellect. If we depend solely upon what our physical senses and rational minds tell us is true, then faith may appear foolish. And yet it is upon this very attribute of the soul which the Edgar Cayce readings say that spiritual development rests. Let's explore the nature of faith by first considering what it is not. The opposite of faith is doubt. This attitude is perhaps the most paralyzing of all states of mind because of the way in which it collapses our consciousness, creating a kind of tunnel vision which permits us to see things only in their most limited form. We can therefore get a clue as to the nature of faith by imagining what the opposite experience to doubt would be like. Faith must in some way expand consciousness, allowing us to see greater dimensions, opening our vistas. The Edgar Cayce readings stress the distinction between faith and confidence. Whereas confidence depends upon physical sense perceptions, faith rests upon the direct experience of that which is unseen by normal means. There may, in fact, be nothing inherently wrong with confidence itself. When our lives are blessed with outward signs of success, then it's quite natural to feel an enhanced self-confidence. The problem arises when we equate it with faith and forget to nurture this quality, which is more important than confidence to our spiritual growth. In a similar fashion, the co-founder of the Unity School of Christianity, Charles Fillmore, invites us to make a careful distinction between faith and trust. Writing in his classic book, The 12 Powers of Man, Fillmore says this about faith: "There is but one real faith. The avenue of expression determines the character and power of faith. Trust is a cheaper brand of faith, but trust is better than mistrust. As a rule, people who merely trust in the Lord do not understand all the laws. If they had understanding, they would affirm the presence and power of God until the very substance of spirit would appear in consciousness, and this is faith established on a rock." In other words, Fillmore points out the way in which real faith brings an understanding which is often missing when we merely have trust. Again, there is nothing inherently wrong or unspiritual with trust. The problem arises when we settle for something less than faith, instead of stretching to reach all that the Word can mean to our spiritual development. We can take this indirect approach to discerning the nature of faith one step further by identifying another term that is often mistakenly equated with faith. Writing in the book entitled Stages of Faith, the contemporary theologian James W. Fowler cautions us to distinguish between belief and faith. Belief is defined as holding of certain ideas, and we might well expect that belief could be one of the ways in which faith expresses itself. He points out that modern culture has reduced the word belief to mean agreement with a set of propositions or commitments to a belief system. For example, when we encounter people from another religious tradition, we're likely to ask, "What do they believe?" as if that were the key question. But Fowler points out that simply listing the assumptions of their belief system hardly gives us a very significant level of depth in understanding how they experience their religious tradition through faith. To understand the nature of faith, perhaps we should start at the same point as the Edgar Cayce readings, with ideals. Ideals are both spiritual aspirations and affirmations of actual personal experience. In other words, if you set love as an ideal for your life, it is both because you aspire to manifest it more frequently and because you have had at least some direct experience or taste of love. In other words, it's not a mental abstraction or moralistic obligation for you, but instead a peak spiritual experience from your past, which you wish to honor and touch more often. The great Protestant theologian of this century, Paul Tillich, speaks in a similar fashion as he describes the ultimate concern of one's life.
With this phrase, he invites us to look beyond beliefs we claim to hold or propositions of some religious doctrine. What is it that concerns us ultimately? What is that dimension of life that both transcends mundane affairs and yet paradoxically permeates them and gives them meaning? In the language of the Edgar Cayce readings, it is your ideal. Faith, then, is our relationship to that which concerns us ultimately. In the Search for God material, faith follows ideals, because faith concerns how the ideal becomes a living reality. It is not enough just to have a set of spiritual ideals for one's life, as important as that step may be. It is only through the experience of faith that that ideal comes alive for us. Faith has this living quality because it involves an actual experience of higher dimensions of life. In the Cayce readings, we find the notion that faith is like a bridge that spans the gulf from the seen to the unseen world. That bridge is not possible merely through belief or confidence or trust. Faith permits the immediate experience of what would otherwise remain hidden to us. In a further explanation, James Fowler describes faith as the capacity to live at more than a mundane level, to see, to feel, to act in terms of a transcendent dimension. But how is this extraordinary way of knowing possible? Surely it is a way of knowing which goes beyond what our rational, conscious minds could ever ascertain or prove. Faith involves a kind of visionary way of knowing someone or something. And so, rather than merely an intellectual exercise, faith involves the heart, or feeling nature, plus the human will. Fowler points out that the Hindu term for faith translates to set one's heart upon. In other words, as we build a faith relationship with something bigger than ourselves, or even with another person, something at the heart level must be stimulated and engaged. Not only must it concern us ultimately in a mental way, but it must also resonate deep within the feeling life, building in us a profound sense of commitment and loyalty. But what part does the human will play in the experience of faith? As the great American philosopher and psychologist William James has pointed out, we know the human will principally through the way it allows us, both inwardly and outwardly, to direct attention. In fact, the experience of faith would not be possible without a disciplined use of the attention kept consistently on that inner vision of the ideal. We could say that being unfaithful usually begins with the wandering of attention to thoughts and feelings which make us forget the ultimate concern. But the will is involved in the experience of faith in another way. It allows us to put into action that which is held in consciousness. Genuine faith must find ways of expression in the daily life, and it is only through a healthy, attuned will that such application is possible. Faith, then, is a visionary way of directly experiencing and knowing the unseen dimensions of life. This holds true for faith in God, just as it does for faith in another person, because in the latter case, faith allows us to directly experience higher truths about the soul. Faith is the alignment and attunement of three principal functions of the soul: thinking, feeling, and willing. This definition finds further elaboration in the work of Rudolf Steiner. Although Steiner was a contemporary of Edgar Cayce's and taught an esoteric philosophy much like Cayce's, he is relatively unknown to American audiences. Yet his teachings have had a profound influence on many institutions in Europe, especially on private childhood education through his Waldorf school system and the many healthcare facilities for the mentally retarded. Working in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Steiner had the gift of conscious clairvoyance, which gave him insight into the nature of higher reality. His teachings were transmitted through lectures to small groups of followers. In many ways, he was more directly a scientist and academic than was Edgar Cayce. He took a scientific, empirical approach to the spiritual world, but said that the capacity to know directly these unseen dimensions would require special work on oneself. Steiner's concept of living thinking closely resembles the more familiar term faith found in the Bible and the Edgar Cayce readings. He points out that our culture is preoccupied with a way of thinking and trying to understand, a way which relies exclusively upon a detached, objective use of the intellect. In order to understand Steiner's description of faith, or living thinking, we should first recognize that in his system of thought there is a specific task for humanity during the current 2100-year historical epoch. That task is the development of independent thinking by each individual. What is developed first in that process is a kind of detached, cold observation which has been carefully mastered in the last 200 years. But now, according to Steiner, there is a new challenge, and that challenge is to add to this detached kind of observation the warmth of feeling and the discipline of will. In other words, it is a special challenge of our times to rediscover the meaning of faith. Even though our society is heavily invested in the scientific method, Steiner felt that it was possible to expand that approach to the point where a term like faith would have great relevance and meaning. A scientist of the spirit would replace the cold, detached thinking of the intellect working by itself with the warmth of living thinking illuminated by spirit. Such faith would require no longer simply knowing about something, but loving it. For a final insight about the nature of faith, let's return to the work of Charles Fillmore. Writing in his book, The 12 Powers of Man, Fillmore points out that faith is both expressed and strengthened through the spoken word. How often do you give verbal expression to your faith? Perhaps these inspirational words by Charles Fillmore will encourage you to do this more often. Faith words should be expressed both silently and audibly. The power of the spoken word is but slightly understood, because the law of the word is not rightly observed. All words are formative, but not all words are creative. The creative word lays hold of spirit, substance, and power. Physical science hints at this inner substance and energy. We are told that the manifest forces, such as heat, light, and electricity, are but faint manifestations of an omnipresent element which is thousands of times greater than these weak expressions. The human voice, transformed into electrical energy for radio transmission, develops 270 horsepower. The power of 10 men is equal to 1 horsepower. The human voice, electrified for radio purposes, is equivalent to the power of 2,700 men. In the various processes of stepping up a voice for radio transmission across the Atlantic Ocean, it becomes 135,000 times more powerful than when uttered by the person sending the message. Thus, starting with the initial energy of 1/1000th of an electric watt, the voice is boosted by a powerful station until it is intensified 100 million times. If the spoken word can be mechanically intensified 100 million times, how much greater will its power be when energized by spirit? When Jesus said with a loud voice to Lazarus, "Come forth," he must have made contact with the creative word referred to in the first chapter of John, because the result showed its life-giving character. When he healed the centurion's servant by his word sent forth on invisible currents, he said that the work was done through faith. So faith must boost the spoken word even more than 100 million times, as evidenced by its marvelous results. These words of the founder of the Unity School of Christianity contain a reminder to us of an extraordinary promise. Perhaps Jesus was not speaking only in metaphors when he said, "If you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, Remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you." Let's take a moment now to review all of these definitions and insights of faith that we have explored, and let's do it through a personal reverie.
Make sure you're sitting or lying in a comfortable position where you won't be disturbed for several minutes. Take time to prayerfully consider some of the opportunities and challenges of faith in your life. Begin by closing your eyes and letting your attention move to the flowing in and flowing out of your breath. Don't try to change the rate or depth of your breathing. Simply observe this great rhythm of your body. Then, with each inhalation, feel how you breathe in life. Feel yourself filled with the Spirit. And with each exhalation, experience yourself letting go of any stress or tension in your physical or your mental body. Begin in your mind by standing aside and observing your life, both your inner and outer life. Use your imagination to picture those times when you've experienced confidence. Take a moment to feel confidence as it has manifested in your life. Now clear your mind and move ahead to situations where you felt trust as an active force. Take a moment now to feel trust as it is manifested in your life. Clear your mind once again. Now stand aside and examine your inner life. Observe your beliefs and the role they play in forming your attitudes and choices. Choose one belief you hold and think of those areas of your life it influences. Finally, feel how faith begins with your ideals. Call to your mind that which you have set for your life as a spiritual ideal. Feel this ideal as the highest center of meaning and power for your life. Now slowly begin to bring your attention back, first to your breathing, the flowing in and flowing out of your breath, and then back to your physical body as a whole. When you feel your attention is now back to the material reality, you can slowly open your eyes. Let's close by taking a moment to consider how these powers of your soul must all be involved and aligned in themselves in order to have faith. Faith requires thinking, yes, but it's not the cold, detached thinking of the rational intellect. Instead, faith is a kind of living thinking in which the activity of your mind is permeated by feelings. Think for a moment once again about your relationship with your ideal. To what extent are you able to infuse that ideal with feelings of loyalty and commitment, and even love? and then consider how faith requires the activity of your will. How successful have you been in using your will to keep your attention upon your spiritual ideal in the course of day-to-day living? In what ways have you been successful in using your will to build a closer and closer relationship with that ideal so that you begin to experience its living immediacy? Finally, as you have experienced even small awakenings of this kind of faith, where have you given verbal expression to it? Think of an example where you have used the spoken word to experience the inner power quickened by faith. Identify an area of your life where you now feel ready to start using the spoken word to manifest the faith which you know and feel. Consider these words from one of the Edgar Cayce readings. In its simplicity, it teaches us how our faith can grow. The question was asked of Edgar Cayce, how can I make my faith more active and worthwhile in the lives of others? The answer given was, by exemplifying it in self. For we individuals are as reflections to others of that we worship in our own selves. Let your light so shine that others, seeing their light, may glorify God.